Thank you, and thank you for coming. Thank you for coming, guys. This has been a great experience for us to provide those services, those CEU presentations for you. But I'd like to also have some discussion from you and maybe some questions at the end. But I honestly like to learn from all of you. All of you have experiences. So the more collaborative we are today, the better we are going to learn from each other. So a lot of you work with trauma, a lot of you work with addiction. So fire away if you have any comments as I go through this presentation. I worked in substance abuse and mental health for a while, and it has been quite interesting to see how those two diagnoses go hand in hand. The relationship between substance and between trauma is just very intertwined with each other. And I've had clients who have had traumatic experiences that because of those traumatic experiences, they went to, basically they dealt with those traumatic experiences through using substances. And I've had clients who, because of they have used substances, they dealt with their trying to, I mean, they put themselves into situations that become more traumatic. Several of them engaged in harmful behaviors because of the substances. They were not coherent much. They did not really understand what they were doing sometimes because they were quite high, and they drove the car to certain places that could really potentially take their life. But trauma and substance abuse, they go hand in hand. And if we could help our clients and our families recognize that both of those go hand in hand, it's not just well, let's treat one or the other. We've got to treat both. So today we're going to talk a little bit about how do we treat those two diagnoses together. Impact of trauma, most of you know, you have worked quite often with this particular diagnosis, but something that I'd like to pay attention to is that loss of control and the pain that particular individuals feel through the trauma. And that loss of control, think about a person who has been sexually abused. Things happen to that person, whoever the abuser did things to them, and this particular individual who is the victim in this case had absolutely no control. So to deal with that confusion, but to deal with that loss of control is very difficult. And a lot of those victims engaged in certain type of behaviors, engaged on certain substance abusing behaviors because of that lack of control. They wanted to numb their pain. They wanted to not feel. They wanted to really get rid of the pain that they have been experiencing from years and years and years of the abuse. So it makes sense to have, please understand the wording that I'm using. It makes sense. It's not okay, but it makes sense to have someone who has gone through so much trauma to turn to substances, because not necessarily coping, but just the idea or just the desire to numb themselves and not really feel the pain that they have been feeling for so long. You guys are going to get the notes or to get those slides. So for some of those things, I'm not going to spend so much time, so we could have a little bit more discussion, but because we're going to send the slides, I put them in there so you can have them for future references for you to look at them later. So I'm going to skip through some of those slides that I think are not that important for us to discuss. But if there is any one of you who says, hey, I have a question about that particular slide, please stop me and please do ask.
You have to wear black pants.
Okay. When we are treating somebody with post-traumatic stress disorder, we've got all of the symptoms that come with that particular disorder. You've got the depression and the anxiety, mood disorders, sleep disorders, impulse control, and all of that wonderful stuff. And on top of that, we see that clients start also using or turning to substances. So most likely when you have somebody with a traumatic experience, might be a good idea, or it is a good idea to also assess them if they are starting to use substances. In most cases, they do start using substances, so please assess on that particular area. As I said a little bit earlier, individuals who are engaging in substance abuse, that particular behavior, it pushes them toward more risky behaviors, driving under influence, fighting, or unsafe sexual behaviors, which also can create trauma later. So really, somebody's traumatized, they turn to substances to cope, but because they are using substances, they are also putting themselves into very difficult situations that they can create trauma, or can basically a situation can create trauma for them. So something interesting for all of us to know is that individuals who are using substances and have experienced trauma, they have basically much poor outcomes compared to those that have only experienced trauma. The treatment actually goes longer because you have two diagnoses to treat, you have two diagnoses to take care of, but also sometimes therapy is painful. And if they are going to perceive therapy as painful because we're going to the deep roots of trauma, and sometimes it's very difficult for individuals, for our clients, to actually handle things that are going in therapy. So they're going to quit and they're going to continue with their substance abuse behaviors. Or substance abuse is so difficult for them, it's so difficult to maintain or to establish and maintain recovery. So they also quit treatment prematurely. So that's something to have in mind. If you have clients with dual diagnosis, outcomes of treatment might be a little bit more poor than the other clients who you are treating only for one or the other diagnosis. Okay. Well, they initially feel better. Our clients will initially feel better when they come to therapy. A lot of them are going to participate also on some medication assisted therapy. So they initially feel better, but eventually, as you start the deep process of trauma, that is when you are going to, either way, the deep process of trauma, or if you are going to really target sobriety, that's when things are going to get difficult. So really in the middle stage of treatment, that is when your clients are going to have the desire to end therapy. All right, so how do substances interfere with trauma and recovery? When they're using substances, initially they feel better. We've got several clients who have reported that when they use benzos, they get that relief from anxiety. When they use stimulants, they get more energy, more focus. With marijuana, they are going to feel more relaxed. And with alcohol, they can even go to work. They can go out to a party and feel relaxed amongst their friends. So they can see that even though they are struggling quite a bit with trauma, by using substances, that initial reaction is, I feel better. So they can continue to justify their use, and they start using substances as a method of coping with their own trauma. So they are starting to self-medicate. That is a good stage of therapy to help the clients understand that you might feel better right now, but that's not the right treatment for the long term. How do we treat trauma and addiction? Do we treat them separately or do we treat them together? What are some of your thoughts, you guys? You probably are all muted. We've got some individuals in the chat. Somebody is asking, I'll take these questions. Yes, you will get the slides. Is there a relationship between trauma and poor mental health? Absolutely. You've got individuals who are struggling with trauma. You've got poor sleep. I think it was discussed I think I had that slide in a previous slide. You've got basically more depression, more anxiety, poor health, poor physical health, and poor mental health as well. you've got some answer that I'm seeing here. You've got to treat the trauma and you've got to treat the substance. Actually, the best way, both of those are right. The best way to treat substance abuse and trauma is to treat them together at the same time. However, that's what research shows. However, if you have a life-threatening behavior in either of those diagnoses, if it is trauma or basically life-threatening behavior related to trauma or to substance abuse, that life-threatening behavior is going to be treated first. And also, if trauma is extremely more severe than substance abuse, then yes, you are going to treat trauma first. But there have been some discussion about, well, if we treat trauma, then the substance abuse is secondary. Not necessarily. They really go hand in hand together. Because I'm traumatized, I'm using substances, but because I'm using substances, I'm putting myself into situations that can create more trauma for me. So really having that hand-to-hand, both diagnoses, both illnesses, being treated hand-to-hand will be the best way to treat, according to research. You might get much more with your clients by doing that. Oh boy, how do I do this now? Okay, all right. Best interventions for trauma and substance abuse: individual therapy, group therapy, family or couples counseling, and medication-based therapy. Personally, I like the individual therapy because there is so much work that you can do with individuals, and there is sometimes stigma, there is sometimes unacceptance happening in the family. So if the family has not accepted that addiction is a disease and that the patient or the client is not necessarily simply just doing this out of you don't care about us. So if the family is not there, is not ready for treatment, then individual therapy creates quite a bit of progress for the client. But group therapy, we all know the power of the group. We all know the power and the community and the support that group provides. There have been so many places, there have been so many groups that I've run that I have seen the clients say, if you can do it, I can do that too. If that coping skill helps you, I'm going to try that too. So the power of group therapy, especially for both trauma and for substance abuse, is absolutely wonderful. A lot of trauma survivors need or have that need to have their trauma, their experience validated. And what a better way or what a better setting to have that particular trauma and that experience validated in group therapy, where they can not only be understood by others, but there are also others in the group who have had similar experience. So really, it's a great way to have that progress in group therapy. I've got a question in here. You address trauma as a single event. Is there a difference in treatment modalities for recent, past, or childhood trauma, lifelong trauma versus recent? Oh, this is a wonderful question. I will have to do a little bit more research on that. Most of the clients that I've worked with, I have used both motivational interviewing. I use in groups what is that called? Seeking Safety. I've used the cognitive behavioral therapy, and they have been working very well for either past trauma or for recent trauma. However, there is a difference between past and recent trauma. With recent trauma, you've got the perpetrator probably most likely still around the victim, so there is a little bit more work that needs to be done with the relationship between the perpetrator and the victim. With past trauma, that relationship is still there. But what I found in my practice, you might find something different. What I found in my practice is that my work with trauma survivors has been the same, regardless of being past or present. But I have to look at family dynamics or relationship dynamics between the perpetrator and the victim if the trauma is current. And that has been a much more extensive work than past trauma. Most likely past trauma, in cases that I've treated with past trauma, the perpetrator is distant from the victim physically or not so much emotionally, but at least physically. If the victim is an adult right now, and he or she was, or they were abused as a child, so we've got some separation in location, separation in emotion. We've got some, basically that relationship with the perpetrator is a little bit different than the relationship with the current perpetrator, current trauma perpetrator. So I would say the dynamics of that relationship will be a little bit different in the current trauma. A lot of family coupling, or family or couples therapy is very helpful for victims of trauma and substance abuse, because that is when that forgiveness is established. That is where relationships are starting to become healthy. That is where boundaries are needed to be set. So I think a combination of all of those modalities, individual, group, family, and also medication management, is actually very helpful. In one particular case that I worked with a particular client who was in treatment for substance abuse, however, had also a secondary diagnosis of trauma. He was taking he was a participant of medication assisted therapy, and his wife was not very supportive of that. Her thinking was, we had a lot of sessions with her, but her thinking was, if you cannot do it on your own, if you need medications to keep you from your sobriety, then you are still using. So in family therapy, family members, spouses, children, if they're adult children, or parents, whatever the relationship is, they will also need to understand how to work, or how to help and how to support addicts who are going through their road to recovery. Medication-based therapy is, for me, it has been very helpful. You've got so many different medications who really help the clients start working on their trauma and start working commitment to maintain sobriety. Yes, they are taking that medication, but really that medication is helping them to be a functioning husband, a functioning wife, to be a functioning family member or employee. And that medication really helps them to start really seeing things from a different perspective, to start really delving into their trauma. So with a lot of families, you probably need to do a little bit of education about how important medication-assisted therapy is, rather than simply another way for them to use. I like the inner child work for not recent trauma treatment. Absolutely, a really good one. That's great. Melanie, maybe you could tell us a little bit about briefly how you use that work with treating recent trauma.
I think that in my experience, inner child work is just really powerful. It tends to be informative around, connecting the way that you were raised in your family and how that affected you, or trauma that you've experienced in your childhood, and how that has allowed you in your adult years maybe to be vulnerable to other forms of trauma, or to be re-traumatized, and being able to connect that and heal that inner child and create a space of safety and healing and protection for that inner child by you being the adult, really helps you also protect yourself in your adult life. So I find that really powerful work.
Yeah, that's great. And Josh, to answer your question, yes, trauma impacts the brains, especially impacts the areas that creates what is that, a stress hormone, cortisol. Yes, so it really impacts the fight or flight, the ability for the brain to really react to very stressful situations. And when somebody is in a significant trauma, the ability to really fight is consistently lowered. Several years ago, I was in a car accident, and I was a driver. I was driving my whole family. I had my husband and my kids in there, and I was very aware that the car was going to hit somewhere, and was going to hit on the side of where my youngest child was there. I am quite aware of what happened till the car hit the median. I was spinning in the highway, but after that, I have absolutely no recollection. I don't remember what happened. When the police officer came, I could not give a statement because I did not remember. Me and my kids were all traumatized a little bit, and there were a lot of flashbacks from the accident. Did not go to substances, did not really numb myself, but I have two kids, and both kids and myself had difficulties with sleep. We had quite a bit of nightmares. It was a very traumatic experience, but I did not remember. My recollection was not, basically, I did not remember what happened. And that's also another way of how our brain acts when we are traumatized so much. It's just, maybe it's a way to protect us that we do not really remember certain things, but also you have a lot of people who dissociate during significant traumatic events. So trauma impacts the brain quite a bit. Okay. All right. As we are talking about individuals who are struggling with trauma and substance abuse, some of their needs, really what I like from this slide is that need for empowerment. They need to know that they have a voice. They need to know that they can actually get better, and they need to learn that they are resilient. They were once resilient. Trauma has taken that away from them, but it can be reestablished again. So if we could really give our patients or our clients that hope that they can get better, and we can help them to empower themselves to find their voice, with love and understanding, they can actually make certain improvements. Now, a lot of times, I remember I was doing a family support group with parents and addicts. I was working in a residential facility for substance abuse at that time. And as I was talking about understanding the addict, one of the mothers, she had one of her adult son in the group. One of the mothers said to me, "What about us?" And when she said that, it was really an eye-opening for me, because a lot of time we really focus on what are the needs of the addict and how we can support. But we really need to look at validating the family members, because they have gone through a lot. They have gone through anger. They have gone through setting boundaries. They have gone through betrayal. They have gone through a lot of things that sometimes not only they are not recognized for their own pain, but sometimes they feel dismissed because we focus so much on understanding the addict and understanding their trauma. So I think it's very important to also validate the family's experiences with addiction and with trauma of their loved one, and really being able to also understand what are their needs. Caring for the caregiver, absolutely, yes. These family members have gone for years caring for that particular family member who has both had either the trauma or the addiction. So being able to make that family member visible as well, it's very important. Families also have that need for transparency and boundaries. As you know, boundaries are very important with both diagnoses, with trauma and with substance abuse. You've got there some symptoms that are very common for both of those diagnoses. You've got anger, anxiety. Family members will need to understand how they're experiencing and how can they support each other. It's not just supporting the addict, but it's supporting his or their family as well. So we've got to, with a lot of families, you've got some of them who understand the idea of the addiction is a brain disease, and you got several family members who think it's a choice. So depending on how they see addiction, they are also going to, that will also depend on how supportive they are for different family members. So being able to help the family members understand what is addiction and how does that impact the brain. It can be helpful in their road to recovery because they'll be more supportive of their loved ones. Let's talk a little bit about how do we work in our therapeutic setting. I really like to ask myself, as I see a new client, as I meet a new patient or a new person that I meet, I always try to put myself into their shoes and to ask myself how it is to be like John, how it is to be like Matthew, how it is to be like Jennifer or somebody else. If we really understand how it is, if we really understand how it is to be like them, how they live their life, what anxieties they have, what fears they have, and what hopes they have, I think it's very important for us to say, now we know how to support you. And there are times that we don't know how to support them. I was doing a family session one time with, this was my biggest family session ever. 12 family members came. So there were 14 people, and it was really one of the best sessions, but they all came and said to the client, I'm going to help you, and I'm going to do this for you, and I'm going to do that for you. And then this client said, that's not what I need. So it's very important for us as family members to say, what are the client's needs and what are the family's needs? Because there are a lot of times that we think we know, but we don't know. Okay. Let's see. I like the idea of using that empowering approach. I like the idea to see what has helped the client reach make the progress that they have made. I like the idea of asking them what has worked in the past, how they have solved their own problems, because when I understand how they have solved their problems and what has helped them in the past, I think I can build from them and from those good positive things that they have had, and I can go further with what can you do to help, or what can you do to solve other problems in the future. So being able to really understand what works and what strengths the patients have, or the client. I'm so used to patients because I work at a hospital. I apologize, you guys. You might be calling, they are clients, but being able to understand what strengths they have helps me understand how I can actually push them to really expand those strengths that they have. So that's really, that has worked very well for me. Building that hope for the client has been very very important. Adriana and Jenna, probably. Thank you for those comments. Yes, attending to verbal and nonverbal cues. Sometimes they are not going to say much. Sometimes you are going to really read from there how they sit in therapy, how they talk to you. Are they looking at you, or are they looking to their spouse? Where is their head? Meaning, what I mean is, by do they keep their head down, or are they looking straight up to you? So really being able to understand that, being able to help the client understand that, yes, you are into a difficult situation, but there is hope. There is so many things that you can do to make your relationships better, to cope with your trauma, to actually get over your substance abuse, to maintain your sobriety. I like the idea of this self-preservation. A lot of times our clients have done certain things as a way to cope with whatever trauma or substance abuse, but really it's a way to preserve their own selves. For the rest of us who are not dealing with those things, we look at that behavior and we might label it as dysfunctional. But if we think about that, that is the best thing that the client could do for that particular moment. So even though it might be easier for somebody on the other side to judge that part of behavior, think about this. That's the best thing that they can do. That's the best resources that they are using. Yes, they might be considered manipulative or whatever label we are going to be giving them, but whatever they are doing, whatever the client response is a way for self-preservation. We've got to really help them understand that there is that determination and resourcefulness that our clients have. Regardless of being positive or negative, we can steer them toward choosing more positive resources and more positive, more pro-social way of solving their problems. But even when they do something negative, there is also that self-preservation. A stance that I've taken with some of my clients has been that determination, even when they are using determination in those patterns of behaviors that they are displaying, positive or negative, but find the positives if you can. Claudia said, many will quit and restart again. Every time they restart the process of therapy, do you see them as what they are going through as if the first time, or do you add a higher expectation? That's a great question, Claudia. It really depends. I like to have higher expectations for my client, but at the same time, make sure that those expectations are realistic, because sometimes they are quitting therapy because we as mental health providers and the family members are having so many high expectations and so many deadlines. By this year, by this month, by this week, you should be doing this, that the clients cannot see themselves as meeting those expectations. So they are saying basically another way of self-preservation. Instead of me going to therapy and just feeling guilty that I did not meet my deadline, so to speak, I'll just quit and I'll just go back to substances. So really, realistic expectations are important. But every time they come back to therapy, if we can add some more expectations, I think that would be helpful, because they're at a different time now, a different stage, a different situation. If they come back to therapy, I'd like to ask my clients about, what did you learn from the time that you have not been in therapy? How has life been for you? What do you want to accomplish? And usually when they come back to therapy, they come back with more renewal to meet their goals. So that is a great time to actually increase the expectations that you have for the clients. Okay. Important is to celebrate progress, the last item on this particular slide. Healthy boundaries, support, accountability, and celebrate progress. I like the accountability part, because as we are working with the addict, or even with individuals who have struggled with traumatic experiences, we don't want to enable any of those clients. Enabling doesn't help them get better. We've got to hold them accountable for their behaviors. The more accountable they are held, the higher the expectations that they set for themselves and we set for them. But accountability comes with healthy boundaries. You cannot have one or the other. They both have to be there. What will happen if Johnny is going to use again, comes home drunk? What do I need to do if I'm Johnny's wife? What are the expectations and what are the boundaries? And that is where enabling comes there as well. If I'm saying, okay, Johnny, excuse me, here is another time. I got used to your drinking. Come on in. Or maybe I can say, Johnny, we decided that if you are drinking one more time, you cannot sleep at home tonight. You're going to a hotel. The more firm we are with setting those boundaries, the higher the level of personal accountability. So there is nothing wrong with setting those boundaries. Sometimes we become enablers because we feel bad for our family members, but it is that level of accountability that is going to help them get to their goals, achieve their goals, and maintain them much faster. So don't feel afraid to set those boundaries and to maintain them, as long as you are doing them with love and they are understanding that I'm doing this because I want the best for you. And if I don't, you will continue with the same behavior. So, okay, I know I'm going through those slides a little bit too fast, guys, but I think this is more educational for us. Some of those slides, the information on those slides, and you are going to get them, but I think I'd like to spend a little bit more time to the stages of treatment. That's why I'm going a little bit so fast on that. Assessment, I've got some slides here for assessing the individual and assessing the family. Something that I really like to understand is if there is any, basically, if it is a substance abuse patient, I'd like to know what is the family history. Definitely that, because it really takes away the stigma. Addiction goes from one generation to the other. I also like to go through the support system. That's very important to me, because if I know who their support system is, that is who I'm going to utilize for their support during treatment. Okay. For family assessment, I'd like to know the structure and the stability, because those two particular items are going to tell me what is happening in the home and how basically a more structured and more stable family environment creates a more healthy environment for the recovery of both diagnoses. And especially with the structure, or basically the safety of family environment, especially if we have a perpetrator at home, I need to understand that, because that will actually change the course of treatment as well. Cultural views are they have been very important for me. I'm a foreigner myself, so to me I know I grew up in a different culture. Things mean different in different cultures. So even when it comes to alcoholism, I remember in my family he has passed away now, but a family member who drank a little bit too much. He was an alcoholic, but nobody really recognized that he was an alcoholic. And everywhere we went, it was, oh, he drinks a little bit too much. It was acceptable in the culture. Actually, even children could drink in my particular culture. So, but you could see that different cultures do not really put much emphasis into certain behaviors that could influence or could impact addiction or trauma. So there are also family members that I've worked that when the abuse has happened from a family member, they don't want to get that family member in trouble. So it's kind of, I worked with a family that grandma was sexually abused by one of her uncles. Mother was sexually abused by one of her uncles. Daughter was sexually abused by one of her uncles. As you can see, in this particular family or in this particular family culture, abuse is normal. So understanding those, assessing and understanding those particular expectations that families have will be important for you to know what kind of treatment you need to provide. All right, the stages of treatment. The goals, really increasing that wellness in different areas of the person. You've got social, emotional, cognitive, relational, moral, and physical wellness, but really improving personal strength, improving relationship with others, and appreciation of life in recovery. So as you can see, I have 3 goals that I usually focus on. So personal strength, relationship with others, which is family members, neighbors, friends, co-workers, etc., and appreciation of life in recovery. A lot of times when I've worked with both trauma and addiction, you've got also suicidal ideation. So really, when I talk about appreciation of life in recovery, this one is very loaded. Appreciation of life in recovery, because I'm doing so many things now. I'm free from substance use and I can be a functional family member. I'm also free of trauma. You never can be free of trauma, but basically I have coped with the trauma and I can enjoy life now. But also appreciation of life as I can live my life rather than thinking about taking my life. So really, that appreciation of life in recovery has a lot of depth and a lot of weight in there. I've worked with these particular individuals in 4 stages. So first one, stabilization and symptom reduction, especially if we have life-threatening behaviors, we need to stabilize those particular clients. Commitment to work. Unless I have that commitment to work, I cannot go much further. So sometimes, depending on the client, that commitment to work takes a little bit of time because they are not ready. Think about stages of change if you are working with addict. But as soon as I get that commitment to work from both the individual and the family, the work goes much, much faster. After I gotten that committed to work, I've got to do skill development, a lot of coping skills, a lot of teaching the clients about how to maintain sobriety, how to cope with the past trauma. So you've got here, this is basically the meat of your work. a lot of teaching them how to manage frustration, stress, anxiety, depression without any suicidal ideation or without engaging in any other behaviors that might be damaging to them. And then stage 4 is one of my favorites because you're really breezing in here. You're teaching them how to maintain their recovery. And this is quite enjoyable for me because also clients are excited about doing all that work. They're always going to work on maintaining sobriety, but they are so willing to work in here. They have coping skills. They have been sober for for a while. They have coped with their trauma. So it's really, you can see the client smile in this phase. You can see the client really integrate so well with their family members, with their work, with their school, whatever they are doing. So this is basically, they are having fun right now. Okay, let's start with our first stage of treatment. Reducing any life-threatening behavior and really helping the client and also the family members understand how body and mind respond to stress and to substances. So you're going to, I've got coping skills here, but really coping skills will go on the other stage mostly. But here you are teaching them just some coping skills to soothe themselves, because if they're having any life-threatening behaviors, they're going to basically, they can learn how to maintain their self safe by using some of those skills. Commitment to work, I like the finding of their why. For me, I need a reason. If somebody asks me to do something, I need to understand what's the reason behind it. But I think even with our clients, they need to know what is their why they are doing it. And I'll tell you this, I have heard so many clients who are saying, I'm going to do it for my kid, I'm going to do it for my mom, I'm going to do it for such and such. And that's great, that's a great reason. But they also have to do it for themselves. If they cannot find their own personal why, it will be difficult. Their personal why might be, I want to be a good mother, I want to be a good father, and that's great. So it can be a combination of, yes, I'm doing it for my kiddo, but I'm also doing it for myself, because what I've noticed is that when clients say things like, I'm going to do it for my wife, well, what happens if a divorce happens? Then that wife is not there. So they really need to have their own personal why to take them through even through difficult times and during difficult family dynamics. That commitment to work needs a commitment to abstinence. Now, that doesn't mean that they're going to be completely abstaining from drugs. Nope, they are going to use, and it is what it is. They're going to relapse, and actually every relapse is one step closer to sobriety. But every time that they relapse, we had the question, what happens when they come back? Every time they relapse, every time they come back, hopefully they and us as therapists come back stronger. So we can help them with understanding what happened, what caused that relapse, what do you need to do differently. Changing lifestyle to support that recovery. It's very important that the clients are the ones who are understanding. For me to say to them, well, simply don't go to a bar, it's not going to happen. Well, that is a life-changing changing lifestyle thing that they need to do. Don't drive through a bar, get another job if your job requires you to do certain things at night, or basically certain things that might push the clients toward behaviors that are not appropriate for them. They need to make that commitment to have that lifestyle to change. It's better when they come up with those changes that they need to make, rather than a family member or a therapist tells them what they need to do. Sometimes they don't know, and it's okay to have a collaboration, but remember that they need to have their own say. A little bit earlier, we talked about empowering them, helping them find their own voice. And these lifestyle changes that they need to make, it's one way for them to find their voice. When they recognize that they are the ones who chose the changes that they need to make, they're going to keep those changes much stronger than if we are going to tell them. Defining relationship with substances. Why do they drink? Do they drink because they perceive themselves as very uptight and they need to relax when they go out with people? They want to be perceived as friendly and easygoing. Well, if that's the relationship with substance, can we actually meet the same need, but differently? Maybe not at the same level, but differently. Differently is not, differently, it's a good thing. They don't have to look for exactly, I drink, this is how I behave when I drink, and I'm going to look for the same, basically the same relaxation when I use marijuana, or being chill when I use alcohol. But can they be different in different situations that requires them to be pro-social and engage with others? So defining a relationship with a substance also means, what I do with this is also talk about the personal strength. There are a lot of times that clients who are struggling with addiction will say, alcohol takes over me. Then I have to work with self-empowering, who's got the most power. If you have especially clients who have struggled with trauma, control is not, basically the loss of control, but also with addiction, that loss of control. Alcohol, I cannot control myself. Alcohol is completely overtaken me. So being able to really define those relationships with substances and to help the client understand that they are still strong, they can overcome, and they are the ones who can be in control of their own selves and their own behaviors. With this particular item, just please help them to understand that they cannot gain control of substance, they cannot get control of their situations and their actions right away. So we need to be patient with them, and every baby steps are a great way to celebrate their progress. Okay. Skill building in here, we defined the why. Now it's the time for them to walk their why. This is actually the longest stage of therapy, because you are doing a lot of skills building for them to help with managing depression, managing anxiety, managing suicidal ideation, managing triggers of use, establishing boundaries, taking care of themselves. A lot of them do not eat well, do not sleep well. So really doing that, taking care of. A lot of them have difficulties with relationships. You're teaching how to do anger management, how to communicate well, how to problem solve well with family members. So as you can see, this will be your longest stage of therapy, but really it's really an exciting one, because you are really seeing the client walking their why, committed to learn about themselves as much as they are willing to actually improve their situation. If you are especially dealing with trauma, but also with substance abuse as well, cognitive distortions are pretty big in this particular stage. A lot of our clients will talk about them not being good enough. They have some other labels for themselves. So being able to work with cognitive distortions and to create a narrative of themselves as a functioning individual, as a family member, as a co-worker, as an employee, whatever the roles are that the particular individual is playing. But really to be able to process with the client their experiences and to come to more powerful personal narrative, that has been very important in my work with my clients, because it really enables them to say, I can do this. Let's see. I'm going to skip this as well. Building a positive self-view of themselves, very important. Especially work with families. If the client has been labeled by their family members, it's very difficult for them to see that I can do that. If I'm being labeled as you just drink because you don't care. You are so selfish. You only take care of yourself and whatever you want to do, and you don't care that you have 2 kids to take care of. It's very difficult for me to come back with, I am a good mom. I can be a good employee. So really building that positive self-view and creating those healing images for them and the family is very important. with trauma victims, you're going to have that sense of basically responsibility. They need to, in this particular stage, I do a lot of work with where does the blame, you've got guilt and shame in there, but where does the blame need to go? Who is responsible for your own misery? And yes, there are, while the client is not responsible for what happened to the client, the same with addiction in here, they're responsible for their own recovery from trauma or recovery from substance abuse. So really directing that anger and responsibility for their treatment to the perpetrator rather than to themselves. Or to the family members, because if that particular responsibility is not placed in the right place or in the right person, so to speak, then you will have anger management issues. A lot of family members are going to be blamed for what they are doing. So really putting that anger to where it belongs, it has been very important. And the last stage is recovery management. Basically thinking about that commitment to recovery and finding ways to maintain it. It's not just, it's a great progress that we have come to establishing recovery, but long-term, how do we maintain it? How do we not victimize ourselves again if we are going to be basically dealing with that particular trauma? What are my resources? Who are the people in my support system and how I can utilize them? How can I take care of myself? Basically, you're talking about, here's my support system. Here is my plan to take care of myself, eating, sleeping well. Here is how I'm going to deal with triggers of use. Here is how I'm going to maintain myself accountable for my future use, potential future use, hopefully. So basically, you are now you are working with the client into appreciation of their recovery and celebrate their success. With celebrating success, I like to notice both the challenge and the competence resiliency. Actually, that is where the greatest strengths are noticed, because life is not easy. When we focus on how was this challenge overcome by you, they can see that, oh, this is hopeful. I can actually overcome other challenges in the future. So you've got there building competence and giving them hope. Competence because they have certain coping skills that they have used or personal strength that they have used to overcome a challenge. And you are also saying to them, life is not going to be easy for you, but you have the coping skills, you have the personal strengths to deal with that. I'd like to ask them those questions. What have you noticed about yourself that has surprised you and your family in the best ways? And it's really fun to actually see sometimes the family members who are surprised for the best. So it's really great to see how families get together and they celebrate their loved one progress as well. What personal strengths or habits or mindsets have you relied on that you can continue to practice? That is your hopeful future, and you're also working on maintaining whatever progress that they have made. How have you become more intentional as a family? This is a great question for the family members, because when it comes to being intentional, you can work with this question in different areas. Being intentional in forgiving, being intentional in accepting, being intentional in loving, being intentional in setting boundaries and maintaining boundaries, being intentional in creating a good family environment and being a family member. So you can go different areas with this particular question. And how has compassion and acceptance moved your family toward healing? I like the use of those two words, compassion and acceptance, because they need to be there for every single client that we are working with, and for the families. When compassion is there and acceptance is there, clients and families can move quite a bit forward with their particular treatment. So they can do it. So kind of at the end of our presentation, you guys, I really like to leave you with, if we can instill hope, if we can empower those clients to find their own voice, And if we can involve the families into understanding how addiction and trauma impacts their loved ones, if they can learn how to set those boundaries and to really focus on empowering others, empowering their loved ones, but empowering themselves as a family as well, the work can go forward. So, well, that's all I had for you guys. I'd like to hear if you have any questions or any concerns, but any comments as well. What have you found in your work? What has worked well for you? How do you empower your clients when you work with trauma victim and or individuals who are struggling with substance use?
I think one of the things that has really helped me working with my clients is helping them remove the labels that they're given either by professionals or society or family, like really looking at those labels and choosing to release those and not own those, but
Excellent.
help them really become empowered about who they choose to see themselves as.
Absolutely. And Jason just said, believing in them goes a long ways. Yes, it does. They need that chance. They need that hope. Well, I saw one of my long friends in this presentation. Adriana, if you are still there, hello. I haven't seen you for a long time.
Vjollca, I am impressed. You have become an amazing therapist. I have good memories of you, but this was amazing. Thank you so much for sharing with us.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Good to see you again.
Any other questions, you guys, or should we end this? I know that some of you are running to your sessions and you need to get going. I will be here for a few more minutes for anybody who has more questions or who would like to talk to Joseph or I.
Yeah, and just as a reminder, anyone who would like CEU credit, or if you just want the slides, go ahead and fill out the evaluation that I dropped into the chat. If you're experiencing any type of technical difficulty accessing it, go ahead and shoot me an email. I dropped my email in. I'll do that one more time here. If you work for Intermountain, I know that there is a really pesky firewall that sometimes prevents people from accessing it. Go ahead and shoot me an email, and I'd be happy to either send it to a different email, a personal email of yours, or just see what we can do to troubleshoot. And just as a reminder, I'll be sending out slides and also send out the CE certificate for anyone who fills out that evaluation. Yeah, I agree. I just want to echo some of the comments. Vjollca does such a great job with these presentations, and they're so informative. I always walk away feeling like I learned something new every single time, and that's important. You know, and sometimes it's also fun just to kind of review stuff that we've already learned in the past, but maybe we haven't used that often. And so it's a lot of fun. It really is.
I appreciate you guys coming today. I know you all have busy days, so thank you.
Yeah, thank you everyone that participated. Go ahead and shoot me an email if you run into any issues. And if no one has any other questions, we'll go ahead and end right here. All right, thanks everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.